Paul Newman had been racing for 3 years. 12 major events, 4 podium finishes, and when he looked at Steve McQueen, he saw exactly one thing: an actor. "You're a pretender, Steve. I'm a real driver." He said it with 19 people standing right there. Not one of them knew what McQueen was thinking, but everyone in that pit felt it. The air shifted. Something had started. Paul Newman, one of the most intimidating names in Hollywood. 45 years old, 6'1", 172 pounds. 3 years of professional racing since 1967. 12 major races. 4 podiums. 2 lap records. An 11-man factory-backed crew. A season budget, running into the hundreds of thousands. The press had stopped writing about him as an actor. They wrote about him as a driver. He had spent years earning that title, and he had earned it. And when this man looked at Steve McQueen, he saw one thing: a guy who drove cars in front of cameras. "You're a pretender, Steve. I'm a real driver." But nobody that day knew just how wrong Newman was. Steve McQueen was in the middle of filming Le Mans. Not just the lead actor, the producer. His own company, Solar Productions. His own money. And during the shoot he was getting behind the wheel himself for most of the driving sequences. Newman had heard this, and it had gotten under his skin, because McQueen was using real circuits while making a film, and that threatened the identity Newman had spent years building, so he said it in front of those 19 people. A calculated move. "You're a pretender, Steve. I'm a real driver." Nobody in that pit could see what McQueen was quietly setting in motion, and nobody could have guessed how systematic, how cold-blooded that plan actually was. But McQueen had something in his pocket that day that would eventually silence Newman. Nobody knew it yet. An SCCA license. Sports Car Club of America. The official professional racing credential. The document that separated a serious competitor from a hobbyist. McQueen had applied, passed the written exams, completed the practical tests. The license was already in his pocket. He hadn't told the production, hadn't told his crew, hadn't told Newman, but nobody knew that yet. The Le Mans shoot ran through all of 1970, and while it did, McQueen was running a second track in parallel. Every circuit, every corner, he was writing it all down. A driving log, separate pages for each track, separate analysis for each corner, braking markers, throttle timing, tire wear patterns. This was not an actor's notebook. This was a racing driver's notebook, and the date on the first page fell right after the day Newman said what he said. Newman had been talking publicly about giving interviews. He was going to run Sebring, the 12-hour race. "Sebring is going to be a real turning point for me," he said. He was signaling something, that racing was not a side project, but nobody knew that McQueen had already entered the same race. 2 men, same track, same day. By fall 1970, the Le Mans shoot had wrapped. As McQueen moved into post-production, he kept his race calendar going. Elsinore Motocross, Baja 1000. To the public it all looked like an actor's hobby. Newman had probably heard about it and smiled. Motocross and off-road, that's not real racing. But Newman was missing something critical. McQueen wasn't entering those races for fun. Each one was a training block, different techniques, different surfaces, different demands. And after each one, new pages went into the driving log. Sebring preparation had started 6 months out. Florida, Sebring circuit, 5.2 miles, 17 corners, rough asphalt, tight sections, long straights. McQueen committed every inch of it to memory, worked the maps, watched footage from previous years, who passed where, who won, who lost, why. He spent hours on this, days, and at the end of every session, something went into that notebook. But nobody still knew exactly what was in it. Not Newman, not the production, not the press, and that was exactly how McQueen wanted it. March 1971, Sebring, the 12-hour race, one of the most punishing events in motorsport. Starts in daylight, runs into darkness, it destroys cars, it destroys drivers, more than 60 cars, over 300 mechanics and technicians, 50,000 spectators, and somewhere in that field, Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. The day before the race, in official practice, Newman ran 14 laps, consistent pace, reliable crew, everything moving as planned. McQueen ran 9 laps, but every lap was different, different braking point, different throttle entry, and between each lap, something went into the notebook. Newman would race a Porsche 911, co-driver Bob Akin, 4 mechanics, 2 pit strategists, 1 data analyst, 6 months of preparation, test sessions at Watkins Glen. McQueen would run the Ferrari 512S, Peter Revson, alongside him. British racer, Formula One experience, a serious combination. But the real variable was McQueen himself.
Race morning. The pit lane was tense and quiet. Florida mist still sitting over the track. 40 meters between the two pit areas. Mechanics running final checks. Drivers settling into their cars. Every pit living its own routine. But those 40 meters, without anyone quite realizing it, were the distance everyone was tracking that morning. Newman arrived at 7, coffee in hand, talking quietly with his crew, composed on the surface. But his strategist Tom Davey said later, Paul talked less than usual that morning, focused. But he kept looking left, toward McQueen's pit. McQueen arrived at 7:30, no fanfare, just his chief mechanic and Revson. He sat in the car. 5 minutes, didn't move, said nothing. Then climbed out, said a few words to his crew, and walked past Newman's car. Newman glanced at him, then looked away. But 6 mechanics who were in that pit lane that morning told the story later. McQueen had slowed as he passed the Porsche, turned. Good race, Paul. Quiet, polite, no edge, just 2 words. But Newman's hands, for just a second, reached for the pit wall. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody photographed it. But everyone there saw it. 10 o'clock. The flag dropped. Newman had a strong start, consistent tempo through the first 2 hours. The Porsche was stable. Pit calls were on time. End of hour 3. 5th place. His crew was satisfied. The data was clean. The plan was working. And Newman knew it. McQueen came in differently. Like he wasn't racing yet. Like he was still learning. Revson picked up on it. Steve was talking to the track in those early hours. After every corner, something over the radio. Braking distance, tire temperature, surface texture. He didn't sound like a driver. He sounded like an engineer. And nobody could see what that meant yet. End of hour 2. Newman stepped out of his pit and glanced at the timing board. McQueen was running 8th. Newman looked at his crew. A small smile. Relaxed. One of his mechanics watched it happen. Said later, Paul looked like he was saying see. Like something had been confirmed. But Newman didn't know something critical. McQueen's 8th place was deliberate. His crew had pushed for an earlier pit stop. McQueen had refused. Let the tire run a little longer. I'm still learning the track. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision that came directly from those 22 pages. McQueen had already calculated the tire degradation curve. He knew exactly when to pit. And until that moment, he was still collecting data. But nobody knew this. Not even the strategist standing in the pit. End of hour 3. First major pit stop. Fuel. Tires. McQueen out. Revson in. The stop took 47 seconds. The field average was 58. That 11-second difference had been drilled through weeks of rehearsal. Newman's crew clocked it. Tom Davey made a note, but couldn't quite work out what it meant. End of hour 5. Something else drew attention. McQueen's Ferrari was climbing the timing sheets. Slowly. 8th to 7th. 7th to 6th. No sudden moves. No dramatic passes. Just steady, quiet, relentless progress. One mechanic on the pit wall said later, McQueen's Ferrari in those hours was like a metronome. Same lap time every lap, but every lap a little higher up the order. Hour 4. Rain. Rain at Sebring splits the field. The experienced adapt. The unprepared panic. Grip disappears. Braking distances stretch. Every driver responds differently. In this moment, this was the critical variable McQueen had flagged in his notes months earlier. Newman dropped to 4th. The Porsche was twitchy in the wet. Not a driver error. A car characteristic. His crew was working on solutions. Valuable laps were going by. McQueen sent a message to Revson over the pit radio. Now, Revson pushed. 1 lap. 2 laps. 3rd lap. 5th place. The Ferrari found traction in the wet. Revson was using every bit of it. But nobody watching this move could see the plan behind it. Rain had been flagged as the highest priority variable in McQueen's notebook. Written months earlier, studying footage from previous Sebring races. Left side of the circuit gives an advantage in wet conditions. Before he had ever set foot in Florida. When the rain came, McQueen was already ready. Because he had already seen it, on paper. The rain ran for 2 hours. In those 2 hours, McQueen moved up to 4th. Newman fell back to 6th. 2 positions between them now. 3:30 in the afternoon. Rain had stopped. Track drying. Driver change. Revson handed the car back to McQueen. And McQueen drove out of the pit. The next 2 hours were the sharpest racing Sebring had seen that season. McQueen wasn't learning anymore. Wasn't taking notes. He knew this track by now. Every inch of it. Now he was driving. He hit every corner exactly where he had marked it. Braking to the millimeter. Throttle timing near perfect. The Ferrari moved lighter, sharper, faster but in complete control. He climbed. 6th to 5th. 5th to 4th. End of hour 9. 3rd place. Race official James Forsyth was watching from the pit wall. Said later, watching McQueen in those hours was something different. There was a style to it. A rhythm. This wasn't an actor who had gotten lucky. This was something built over years. Newman was in 6th. A vibration had developed in the Porsche. The pit stop came earlier than planned. Time lost. And when he looked at the timing board and saw McQueen up to 3rd, something crossed Newman's face. His mechanic Jack Harrington noticed it. Said later, when Paul looked at that board, his face changed. It was small, but we knew him. He felt something shifting. But nobody knew what was coming in hour 11. And when it came, it produced the 3 most important seconds Sebring had seen that day. McQueen came out of a corner and saw Newman's car right in front of him. Same lap. A passing opportunity. McQueen's voice came over the pit radio. 2 words. I see it. His crew answered. It's yours. McQueen pressed the throttle. 14 mechanics froze at the pit wall. race officials went still. And 40 meters away, watching from his own pit area, Paul Newman. McQueen drove past Newman's Porsche. One move. Clean. Precise. No hesitation. Corner 14 at Sebring. 300 meters of straight. Last light of the afternoon. Newman's chief mechanic Jack Harrington described it. Paul froze. He actually froze. He put both hands on the pit wall and stared. A few seconds. Didn't move. Then he said, nothing else. End of hour 12. Race over. McQueen and Revson's Ferrari 512S, second place overall. And Paul Newman, ninth. McQueen stood on the podium, trophy in hand. 50,000 people around him. Cameras, microphones, journalists everywhere. Revson beside him, the crew surrounding them. There was celebration, but McQueen's eyes were scanning the crowd, like he was looking for someone. And he found him. Newman came through the crowd, step by step, toward the podium. Nobody had expected this, not even his own crew. Tom Davey said later, Paul said nothing to us. He just walked. Newman extended his hand. McQueen looked at him, a beat, then reached out and shook it. Newman said something, low, just loud enough for McQueen to hear. I'll give you that. You're a real driver. Nothing else. He turned. He left. Race director James Forsyth was standing right there. Peter Revson was beside McQueen. Sterling Moss was 10 meters away. 12 crew mechanics were watching, and 50,000 people surrounded them. Newman's words came exactly 12 months after, "You're a pretender." After the handshake, Newman walked back, to his crew, to his car. He skipped the press conference. No interviews. He just left. But to everyone watching him go, the weight of those words, "I'll give you that," had already settled in, and nobody had known the full story until Danny Kovacs told it. Danny had worked as a young engineer on McQueen's Le Mans crew. Years later, in the 1990s, giving an interview for a memoir project, he described it. Steve had a notebook. He called it his driving log. Notes for every circuit, every corner. 22 pages for Sebring alone. On the top corner of the first page, just initials, PN9, a date underneath, and one single word, answer. 22 pages, every corner of Sebring, PN 197, answer. Written from the day Newman said what he said, updated after every training session, every test, every race for a full year. And those 22 pages had matched Sebring perfectly. This was not revenge. This was proof. And the proof was delivered not in words, but by a racetrack. Steve McQueen died in 19... He was 50 years old. Mesothelioma. But what he left behind was not just films. There was a character. A way of standing. A man who when insulted didn't speak. He moved. A man who when dismissed didn't argue. He opened a notebook. A man who answered a sentence spoken in front of 19 people in front of 50,000. Everyone who looks at the 1971 Sebring results knows. Ferrari 512S, second overall. McQueen and Revson. But very few know about that pit conversation in 19... Very few know about the 22-page notebook. Very few understand the real weight of "I'll give you that." McQueen never said "I won." He didn't need to. Sebring had said it, and everyone who was there had heard it. And unfortunately, they don't make men like Steve McQueen anymore. If you had been standing in that pit lane when Newman said "You're a pretender," what would you have done? Would you have opened that notebook? Or would you have just swallowed it and walked away? This is a fictional story inspired by public legends. Scenes, dialogue, and certain details have been created for dramatic storytelling purposes. No claim is made that these events occurred as depicted.